Hi there and welcome back to another episode of Ask the Experts. I'm Reya El-Salahi, joining you with a very special gardening focused show this evening. We're focusing on all things top tips and hacks to keep your gardening looking great going into autumn. And to do that, I'm really pleased to say we're joined by the editor of Which Gardening, Ceri Thomas. Great to have you with us, Ceri.
Thank you.
And also the chief horticulturalist at the Royal Horticultural Society, or the RHS for short. Guy Barter, good to have you with us.
Hello, yeah, pleased to be here.
Really good to have you here. Do stay with us over the next half hour or so to get your questions, your comments, your photos looked at and answered. The experts are on hand to answer all your questions this evening. So whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter or YouTube, get in touch by commenting below, and you can do that just by posting your comment under this video and you get your question answered. Now, with less than a fortnight to go until autumn officially starts, the signs of a change of season are very much underway. We're already seeing them all over here in London. Wherever you are, do get in touch and share your picture and show us your signs of autumn. So talking of this time of year, what gardening chores should you be doing, particularly this week, Ceri?
Well, for me, it's never too early to start buying your bulbs for next spring. You'll find the garden centre at the moment's got the best range of the varieties out there. You can really pick and choose which ones you'd like. My top tip though is try and avoid the loose buckets of bulbs, because you'll find even this early in the season people will have been mixing them up and they're not going to be quite what you hope so. So do pick the bulbs now. You don't need to plant them straight away, though the sooner the better with most bulbs is the best idea. We've just done a test in Which Gardening of how late can you get away with planting bulbs, and we found that for most bulbs you can plant really up until sort of November, December time, although the later planting ones tend to be shorter and they tend to have a quicker display. So earlier you get them in, the better. Though tulips, probably better to wait until November when the conditions are that bit cooler and moister and it gives them the best start.
Now, I don't know if it's just a really nosy thing on my part, but I love when you meet anyone that's an expert in this world, finding out what their garden actually looks like. Guy, what chores are you doing in your garden at this time of year?
Well, this time of year is a really good time to start off some food crops in the allotment, and I went to the plant centre at Wisley Gardens this morning and bought myself some onion sets. These are onion sets that overwinter. You put them in the ground now and then you harvest onions next June or July with any luck. So I went up there, I got a packet of each kind because I feel I have to try them out for the benefit of the Royal Horticultural Society members, otherwise I wouldn't be able to speak with authority. And also, sowing a few seeds. I usually like to put in some spinach seeds now because they have a lovely crop of spinach, and some lettuces, a lettuce called Winter Density that's particularly pleasant and tasty, even though it has an extremely hard life, but by April it's recovered, like the spinach, and it's ready to eat. So although I'm pretty fed up with my allotment and vegetable garden after a summer of hard watering, I've still got the enthusiasm going to start some more things.
It's been a really, really warm summer this year. We've had weeks and weeks, particularly down here in London, of non-stop wall-to-wall sunshine. Has that been an absolute nightmare for gardens, Ceri?
Well, it's give and take really. The sunshine has really benefited some of the plants. Ones that like those sort of warmer Mediterranean type conditions have had a really good year. My lawn though, on the other hand, is just looking desperate, and where I am I've got thin chalk soil. My neighbours have got a Leylandii hedge. It's just terrible, and so I'm afraid it's just so dry. I'm going to have to refork it over now, kill all the weeds first, refork the soil, bit of fertiliser on there, something like Grow More, and then I'm going to re-sow it with one of our Best Buy grass seeds, and then hopefully it should start sprouting before we get the colder weather, and I'll be onto a head start for next spring.
I'm sure lots of people watching nodding their heads in agreement that lots of people's lawns looking worse for wear. Guy, what are your top tips for dealing with a struggling lawn?
Well, it's well worth thinking about overseeding. I was speaking to our head grassman at Wisley Gardens yesterday morning, and he's found that there's lots of areas that have been scalped by the mower, which means the mower has cut them and they haven't regrown because the poor old grass has had a miserable time of it. And he let the grass grow up tall to fight off the drought, and then he cut it down again, and some of the grass that grew tall has not really recovered. So he's on his hands and knees pulling it out bit by bit. And then this morning I saw that he'd spread seed over it, and lots of the lawns he's spreading seed. He uses one that's rich in creeping fescues. So when you're buying your lawn seed, it's worth looking for creeping fescues because they bind the turf together and fill in and make the sward good again. And because it's now still warm, the soil's still warm, it's chilly at night all right, but there's dew and we've had a bit of rain, so grass seed germinates in a few days. So the next couple of weeks it's a great idea to spread grass seed on bare patches and on thin patches. Use your rake just to mix it into the soil a bit, and if it does get a little dry, then water it, but it shouldn't need much watering. So that's that's what we're doing at Wisley.
So aside from what you should be planting at this time of year, what should you be harvesting this week or in the coming weeks?
Well, it's a good time now to be looking at your pumpkins and squash. A lot of those will be just about ready by now. A little tip is just to give them a knock with your knuckles and you'll hear the sound. When they're not ripe, they're very solid, but when they are ripe, they're much more sort of hollow sounding.
It's almost like knocking on a door.
Yes. Not quite not too hard though. And then you'll need to make sure that you dry them properly, especially if you're hoping to keep especially the squash over there and into the winter. I would cut it from the plant with a handle and leave it outside for a few days, then maybe move it into the greenhouse if you've got one, or somewhere that's light and airy. Leave it in there for a week or so and then bring it into the house, and then eventually you can put it somewhere sort of cool and dry in the house itself. Remember though, it's the pumpkins that go off first, so if you've grown those, use those before you start the squash.
Okay, some great top tips and gardening advice throughout the next half hour or so. Don't forget, if you've got a question, a comment, or you'd like to share a picture of your garden with us, do get in touch by commenting below. You're watching Ask the Experts. And moving on, we're talking about how to keep your garden looking bright and colourful when you're transitioning, Guy, from a really hot summer to autumn. We're just over a week away until the official start of autumn. What should you be doing to keep things looking bright and lush in your garden at this time of year?
Well, truth to be told, there's not a lot you can do because the winter things have not yet started and the summer things are dying out. So I think you can actually take a bit of a break from the garden for a couple of weeks, but use that wisely. Visit the garden centres and nurseries and look for plants that you can restock any areas that are going to be bare because the plants die out with the frost, and you want to replant your hanging baskets and containers. There's lots of wonderful things available, things like violas and pansies, great quantities of them, as well as the bulbs of course. So hold yourself in readiness for that. Some things flower on, and the classic things that flower on are dahlias, and the thing to do with dahlias is to deadhead them assiduously. So as soon as the flower goes over, cut it out, and more flowers will come, and they'll go on doing that until October. They slow down a bit, but they seem to actually like the cold nights and dew. So keep your dahlias, and we'll go on. Things like cannas too, of course, and all those tender flowers that look so good at this time of year.
So there are ways to keep things looking a little bit bright. There are rumours that we're going to have a really hot October. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. If that does happen, is it a nightmare for gardens that you're bearing in mind you're going to have autumn? You need to kind of prepare for that. If it ends up being a really warm October, I might be happy, but will gardeners not?
It is tricky, as Guy says. Some plants just keep going on, and of course as a gardener you know that you want to be putting in your spring bulbs, you want to be planting your bedding, things like wallflowers, sweet williams, but it's so hard to pull out lovely summer bedding when it's still looking so good. Unfortunately, I think it does come a point when you just have to take a call on it and just take it out so that you can get in the winter stuff while the soil is still warm enough for it to really put down good roots and make a good start on the year, but it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, talking of which, what are some of the most common problems that you see at this time of year? Not just with flowers, with trees, with shrubs, with climbers. What are you regularly seeing at this time of year that's a bit of a problem?
Well, I think one of the main things is a thing called powdery mildew, and this is a disease that loves humid air. If the humidity is high, it'll infect the leaves and cover them with a powdery covering on the top. It doesn't like rain. Rain will actually wash it off and destroy the spores. So the dry weather we've been having for the last 6 weeks has really pushed the powdery mildew on. It's attacking things like courgettes and sedums and monadas and other late flowering plants in the garden. But there's not a lot you can do about it, I'm afraid, so just cut out the worst of it. It's not worth spraying fungicides at this late stage, even if you want to. Things that are still growing need a bit of watering, so courgettes, for example, you might well water to help them fight it off. It's a bit of a curse, but on the other hand, I think there's few things that are nicer than a lovely, warm, sunny October. So let's hope the Met Office are right and their forecasts are spot on here.
Our fingers are tightly crossed. We are soon going to be moving on to some of the pictures that you've been sending in, some really great pictures actually, with questions for our experts to ID what some of the plants and insects in your garden actually are. Before we get on to that, let's talk eco-friendly tips, Ceri, for your garden. What are some of your autumn garden eco tips? What should people be doing?
Oh, eco tips, I think really make leaf mould. Leaf mould is a really rich, lovely sort of compost that's made just from leaves, and of course it's so easy to make. You don't even need a compost bin. If you gather the leaves when they eventually start to fall, put them in black bin liners. We found if you just lightly water them, don't make them sort of soggy but just moist, tie the black bin liner up, a couple of holes in it, and you really have decent leaf mould within about a year, 18 months. That can then be used as a free soil improver, so you can spread it over the surface as a mulch, or if you're somebody who still likes to dig, you can dig it into the soil itself.
Okay, and if, as I'm sure none of you watching are, but you're a bit of a lazy gardener, what are your low maintenance tips, Guy? What should you be doing if you're not really up for getting too stuck in?
Well, I think it's worth thinking about avoiding digging. I've stopped digging in my garden, and well, to a large extent, and just remove the weeds by hand and let the soil do its own thing over winter. Where there's been any compaction, you might want to put the fork in vertically and just lever it back. And then in the spring, the soil should be in good condition. If weeds grow over the winter, then smother them with compost in February or cover them with a plastic mulch for a few weeks to kill them, and then the ground is in perfect condition for planting up. And the main reason that people dig is, well, there's two main reasons. In my case, I need the exercise, and otherwise generally to kill the weeds. So if you've already got rid of the weeds by other means, then you can sow and plant in the spring with no further ado.
And while you're at that, any maintenance tips that when it comes to gear that you should be buying, Ceri? What's the best gardening gear to buy for the jobs you should be doing in your garden this autumn?
Well, the October issue of Which Gardening magazine is definitely one you should have on your thing, which should be coming out next week for our subscribers to the magazine. And you'll find we've just done an article on autumn tidy up tools. So a key thing that we always need at this time of year and all year round is a good pair of secateurs, something that cuts cleanly, is easy in your hand. If you don't get a chance to read the magazine to get our best buys, when you go to the garden centre, always make sure you pick up the secateur, feel how it is in your hand. Some people have weak grips, you may be left-handed, and not all secateurs do a good job of catering for that. Also check where the catch is. Can you open and shut it easily without having to sort of hold it in the other hand to manage to do it? And also, let's see that you'll be able to find it in the garden as well. Nice brightly coloured handles, or handles you could put some bright tape on, because I'm always putting them down mid-job and then it's so easy to lose them.
Nothing quite like that moment of panic of where did I put it, and then realising it's right in front of you, which is what always happens to me. Now, before we move on to allotments, let's talk your signs of autumn. It's been a certain feel of shift in season the last week at least. Guy, what's your favourite sign that autumn's on its way?
Well, call me a bit of a nerd, but I do like fungi and toadstools. I'm not that good at identifying them at all. I usually leave that to my plant pathology colleagues at Wisley, who have got a bit fed up with me. But I was walking around Wisley this morning, and there were lots of toadstools coming up in the mulches. We use a lot of wood chip mulches, and in fact the fungal experts say that the fungi that we see now is much wider variety because of the wider use of wood mulches in gardens. And I was at Bridgewater last Friday and looking at walking through the woods there. There's about 60 acres of woods, and they were full of toadstools coming up. It's really interesting to see whether the heat and the drought have curbed the spread of fungi, because of course the fungal strands live underground and the toadstools just pop up hither and thither. So far, from what I've seen, relatively early in the season, it looks like there's a lot of fungal strands under there. There's going to be a lot of toadstools. So I shall have to get my fungal identification book out and go and have a look.
Your magnifying glass. And Ceri, for you, your favourite signs of autumn?
Well, I was at a lovely garden this week working on a series for next year's issues of Which Gardening magazine, and I saw the first acers starting to change colour. They're absolutely beautiful. The Japanese maples, they turn all sorts of different colours at this time of year. And also one of my colleagues, Janice Shipp, who looks after our trail gowns at Capel Manor, She's been lucky enough this year to be visiting Westonbirt Gardens down in Gloucestershire, because she's working with the National Collection holder there on an article about the Japanese maples that will be appearing in next year's issues.
I love the crunch of leaves. I'm really cliched. I just love that thing of kind of walking down the street and seeing brown, red leaves all over the place. Anyway, enough of that. Still to come, we're going to be answering your questions, and thank you for sending them in already. I can see plenty of them coming in. We've got them stacked up and we will put them to our experts. But first, we've crossed over to Witch's Allotment actually with Ceri, who's been taking you on a rundown of the essential jobs that you should be doing in your vegetable patch this month.
It's a good idea to stake the taller plants with a really stout stake like this one, hitting it in with a mallet and then tying the plants to it with a figure of 8. It'll stop them falling over now in the winter winds, and you should have some really good crops ready for Christmas. Spring cabbages can be planted now. They go in at 15 centimetres between the plants in rows that are 30 centimetres apart. This will leave them nice and close together so that in the spring you can take out alternate plants to use as spring greens and then leave the rest to heart up later on in the spring. Now, in case of all the brassicas, you need to make sure you net them, as otherwise it'll be the pigeons eating them, not you. There are still plenty of fresh salad leaves to pick. We've got purple mustard, corn salad and lettuce up here. So just keep on coming to the plot, and then what I like to do is just pick enough for what I'm going to use, and then lovely, lots of fresh salad to use at home. As you keep harvesting, make sure you add all that lovely green material to your compost heap. When we tested composting though, we found that if you add a 50-50 mix of green material and brown materials such as torn up cardboard, that makes the best mix. The greenhouse plants may be starting to look a bit tired by now, but there's still plenty of fruits to be picking. There are cucumbers, peppers and tomatoes, so keep picking them regularly so you get lots of fruits for the kitchen. Make sure as well that you water regularly so you don't get problems with brown blossom end rot on the bottom of tomatoes, or split fruits where they suddenly get a lot of water after a dry period and the skins literally burst open.
Now, from top tips in your allotment, back to your garden. Ceri and Guy here to take a look at the images, the pictures, the snaps that you've been sending in on social media. Don't forget, throughout this show, you can get in touch and ask the experts any question about preparing your garden for autumn this September. Right, let's pick up the first photo, which comes in from Jan, who asks, do you know what insect this is? Ceri and Guy, I'll show you an image while watching at home. You'll have that image on your screen if not already. Jan says it's around 4 inches long. I found it on a cucumber plant in my greenhouse. Any idea what that is?
Well, I don't think I've ever seen one of these before in many years of advising Royal Horticultural Society members, and it's far too big for a grasshopper and it's no cricket, so I think we're just left with locust. Plagues of locust are not that common in Britain, not even in Kent. But two things could have happened. It could be someone's I was going to say pet locust, but more likely it's kept to feed some sort of pet. And supposedly they have been known to occur from being blown in from Spain, which I think is the nearest place that you get plagues of locusts. So it's really unusual. I doubt it's going to cause much harm. I think it would be a thing to cherish if you like insects. And I don't think it'll live, and I don't think it'll breed. So
should you be worried about the effect it might have on your garden before the cold snap?
Well, even a 4-inch locust is a limited appetite. I wouldn't have thought it's going to eat a very great deal.
Right.
So I'm inclined just to let it be and wish it well.
Okay. Well, Jan, hopefully that answers that for you. Moving on, Jason's been in touch to say, can someone tell me why the leaves on my 7 sunflower tree keep on dying? I'm not sure if that's the right picture, is it, Jason? No, I think maybe that one might be it. Should it? No, let's move on to the next one. Jason, we'll come back to yours. Susie says, how do I care for this plant? Is it indoors or outdoors, and will it survive the winter?
That looks to me like a brugmansia or an angel's trumpet, and to be honest with you, we often get them in our garden where a rat or a squirrel has been eating the neighbour's bird seed and then doing its droppings over onto our side. And unfortunately, the seed then germinates in those droppings. So it's not really a plant that I'd want to keep. It's quite unusual, as you say. They're actually a little bit on the poisonous side as well. You can get some really beautiful, though, Brugmansia, or Datura as they used to be known. But really, I'd go to a conservatory specialist or a garden centre and choose some of those lovely double flowers, scented flowers, rather than the ones that you might find as sort of plants in the garden like that.
Yeah, okay. I think we've got Jason's plant here now. I think I'm right in saying that's the Seven Sun flower tree. Is that the one, perhaps, that Jason's asking why the leaves keep dying? Any idea?
I'm not sure of the identity of the tree. Are you?
No, I've never heard that common name, to be honest with you. It's got small flowers, almost think that. It's not a plant I know. I would be very suspicious this year with the very, very dry summer that we've had, that it's just been really affected by that. Fortunately, though, in the last month or so, conditions have improved and we're getting a lot more moisture in the soil. So I hope come next spring, this plant will really get a boost and grow back to normal. What you can do, though, to give it a hand, if it's a sort of a shrub, you can maybe look at reducing competition around the plant. If it's got other plants right up to its base or even grass, try and remove that a bit. Give it some food, something like Grow More next spring, and then mulch around the base, because that mulch will then help to conserve some moisture around the roots and give it a bit of a boost for next year.
Okay, great. Dave has also been in touch with a picture of a plant that to me looks like it's artificial, but Dave says, what plant is this?
I don't think they are testing us. I think it is a real plant. But it's always hard to tell from one little green evergreen leaf.
I wonder, is that a gardenia, do you think there might be, Guy?
Actually, that's a very good choice. I think it probably could be. Yes, that would be my first thing. Quite a difficult plant to keep going, but it's looking in very good condition at the moment. Do you think it's one that's been trained as a standard lollipop shape?
Yes, it looks like that. They've got wonderful scented flowers, but as you say, they're not one that's going to survive outdoors in this country. You're going to need to provide it somewhere protected, a conservatory or a heated greenhouse. We did look, though, on Which Gardening as to whether they definitely need rainwater to water them, because you often hear that, and we found actually they'll do okay with tap water. So if you don't always have rainwater in your water butt, my water butt definitely ran dry this summer, don't panic, as the plants should be okay from that point of view. But really it's giving it that protection from the cold that it needs and a good light position.
That's right, it does need plenty of light, and I've found that most RHS members kill their gardenias by overwatering, so keep it moist, never soggy.
Right, I want to get to your questions as quickly as possible, so I'm going to run through the next few. Joanne has sent this image in and asks, do you know what plant this is?
That's an Echium. They are lovely plants that you can raise from seed, and they're an annual plant. I think pollinators really like those too.
They do, yeah, Vipers buglose, they love them.
Brilliant. Okay, 2 more to go before we move on to your questions. Let's continue with some of the images that you've been sending in. Trish asks, does anyone know what's up with my, and I think I'm going to pronounce this right, laurel?
That's
Perfect.
right,
There
laurel.
we go.
It is a cherry laurel.
Always been green and healthy until now. Any idea what Trish is doing wrong or should be doing?
That looks to me like classic signs of powdery mildew that I was talking about earlier. Laurel show powdery mildew in a particularly different way. They don't have the powdery bit, although if you look underneath the yellow marks that you can see, you will find powdery stuff. There are fungicides offered, but I think at this late season, with the fact it'll grow new leaves next year, I'm inclined to just to put it down to the drought and put up with it. It'll come right in future years. It's not going to cause fatal damage.
Brilliant. Sajana says, can someone explain what's happened to my sedum? It's always been pink, but after dividing it last year, all 3 new plants have 1 pink and many white flowers. Any idea?
I mean, that's a lovely question, and we get a lot of these for the RHS, and people plant a clematis and they planted a blue one, but then it comes up white and stays white. It's really interesting. I think there's a number of things can go on. One is that the flowers develop at different stages, and sometimes they look pink to start with, and then they gradually fade to white. Which if you don't look at your plants every day, you can miss that. And the other thing is you can get sports, so that a plant of a particular colour will have a mutation, and that mutation will be a slightly different colour. So that too could have happened here. I call it a feature rather than a problem.
Certainly looks beautiful. Right, let's get to your questions. We've got about 5 minutes left and we're going to rattle through as many of them as possible. There is still time to get in touch to ask our experts this evening any of your gardening autumn questions. Do get in touch, whether you're watching on Facebook, on Twitter or on YouTube, by commenting below this video. It really is as easy as that. Now, Chris has been in touch to say, how do I overwinter my bedding geraniums?
Well, that's a job my dad used to laboriously do every year. But it's one of those ones where sometimes now gardeners are opting instead to maybe just order fresh plug plants each year, purely because it saves a lot of effort, and actually the prices of those sort of plants have really come down over recent years. However, if you do want to overwinter your bedding geraniums, or sometimes pelargoniums they might be known as, you can lift them now. We found that it's best to keep them in pots over the winter. We did look, somebody told us about just hanging them up in the sort of rafters of their garage, but we found that wasn't the most successful method for us. A lot of those plants died. The main thing you're going to have to watch out for though over the winter are fungal rots. If they get cold and wet, they're going to get the fungal rots and you're going to lose a lot of plants. So it's all about checking the plants really regularly, removing any dead flowers or leaves before they get a chance to get those fungal rots, and also keeping your plants just moist, no moister than that, otherwise they're going to come into growth, you're going to get that coldness. Also check where you're storing them. A lot of people want to put them in the garage, but actually most garages aren't frost free and they're also quite dark. So ideally you'd want to put them in a frost-free greenhouse for the winter. So it's a lot of effort and there's a bit of money involved there as well in the price of heating that greenhouse. So do weigh up whether it's something that's worth the thing to do.
Okay. Leslie says, do dahlias grown in pots need to be lifted or stored, or can I just let it dry and pop the pot in the greenhouse, Guy?
You can just you can leave it in the pot, cut it back when the frost tinges the foliage. That's what I did with all my my dahlias this year, and they survive very nicely indeed. And the ones in the ground, some people get away with leaving them in the ground, but I prefer to lift them and store them in a pot of old potting compost in the garage under a big pile of newspaper to keep the cold out.
Martin's been in touch to say, can you suggest a cure for brown rot on my apple trees, Ceri?
Unfortunately, there's no cure for brown rot. To explain what brown rot is in case you haven't seen it, it usually starts with some sort of physical damage to the fruit. It can be any really sort of tree fruit, things like apples, pears, plums, all sorts of things get it. So something like it's had a peck from a bird, maybe a wasp has been nibbling at it, and then what happens is it turns brown in a sort of circular area, and then you get circles of white spores on there. Eventually the whole fruit gets it, and it becomes mummified over time. It sort of just dries up and looks things like that. But what happens is those fungal spores will then overwinter. So to avoid so much of a problem next year, it's a good idea to go round and pick off anything with brown rot as soon as you find it, and then put it in either the green waste bin at home or in your bonfire if you're somebody who still has a bonfire at this time of year, and then you'll have less fungal spores around for next year.
Here's something we were talking about just before joining you this evening, Bux's caterpillar. Lucy says, what's the latest research and how is it best to deal with, Guy?
The box tree caterpillar has spread very widely now over southern Britain, and there's no actual remedy except to treat the trees with the box trees. I say trees, I mean, and it can be anything, topiary, hedges, all sorts, with an insecticide. Unfortunately, the best insecticide is only available to professionals. It's something called Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria that gives the poor old caterpillars a terrible stomachache. They stop feeding and then they die. But that's only available to professionals. So you'd have to get in a professional contractor to apply that. However, all the other insecticides offered to gardeners that say caterpillars on the label will give good protection. That's all very well, except that by the time you see the damage, usually it's too late to do very much. So the counsel of perfection is to buy yourself a box tree caterpillar trap, and this trap is a plastic bottle really with an opening, and inside you put a lure that contains the female pheromone, and so the males come along and they land on that, and you can count them, and as soon as you see the males you know that there's mating going on, and the caterpillars will hatch in about 7 days, so it gives you a chance to protect your box trees. The question is, will people be able to do that? Is are the days of box finished in Britain, particularly in London? No one knows yet. It's causing a lot of problems in Holland and Germany. And I noticed when I went to a trade fair recently that Dutch suppliers are bringing in lots more box alternatives. One of my colleagues has got a box tree caterpillar ranch at Wisley, where these big cages outside full of box tree caterpillars, and she's spraying them with nematodes. Now, nematodes are a kind of biological insecticide. You spray the little microscopic worms on, they go inside the caterpillar and finish it off. So her research will be finished next year, so fingers crossed we'll have a biological control for them.
So keep an eye on the RHS website, I imagine, for that.
Indeed.
Lots of questions still coming through, and we're quickly running out of time, so I'm going to rattle through as many of these as possible. Stella says, I'm planning to plant 2 pot-grown blueberry plants into my garden where red currants were previously grown. They died after being eaten by magpie moth. The soil's acid. So, Ceri, what should she do to prepare the ground before planting?
Okay, well, I'd make sure that all the roots of the old plant are out. And then really, acid soil is a good thing for blueberries. Because that's what they need. If you haven't got acid soil in your garden and you want to try them, then do try them in pots using ericaceous compost, because that's special compost for acid-loving plants. We actually have just done a blueberry trial for Which Gardening magazine, and we found that last winter, when it was so cold, a lot of our plants in pots actually died from the cold. So ideally, pick a site that's a little bit sheltered. Most years blueberries will be absolutely fine, but I think when you've got a really hard winter, that bit of protection can really help. And if you haven't got a sheltered site, just be out there on really cold weather, maybe putting a bit of fleece over the top just to help keep off the worst of the cold.
Brilliant. Helen says, what's the best time, or rather when is the best time to prune conifer, Guy?
Conifer shouldn't really need pruning, but in an ideal world, because they don't really respond to it. But if needs must, do the job in spring just before growth starts, any time from January, February to March. If you're pruning a conifer hedge, it's really important to prune it this month, not do it in October. Our RHS plant physiologist did some research, and trimming conifer hedges in October is one of the causes, there's more than one, of brown patches appearing on hedges of Leyland cypress, for example. So if you have nothing else to do this weekend, rush out and trim your conifer hedge.
Brilliant. Well, Rosemary's also been in touch to say, what's the best way to get rid of ivy? It's been growing for years and years and years, and it's completely taken over.
Okay, well, ivy is a really tough weed. Think about where it is though, because sometimes people worry about it being on buildings, and there's actually a bit of debate out there as to whether you need to take it off things like buildings. It's quite a natural sort of insulator, and it also helps an awful lot of pollinators and really beneficial insects and creatures in the garden. However though, if it is somewhere where you really don't want it, you can cut down the cut right at the base with a pruning saw, and that will then help loosen the top growth as it dies, and then you can pull it out. You can then treat, if it's got a big stump, you could even treat it with something like a stump killer, or you can, if you're not keen on using chemicals, you could just dig out the roots. It really isn't an easy weed to control, which is why it's a problem for so many people, but measures like that will help.
Final question this evening from Lydia, who I think asks a really good question for this time of year, Guy. She says, can I keep my potted plants in an unheated greenhouse over the winter? Something to bear in mind as we get the cooler weather in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. You can keep your potted plants in an unheated greenhouse as long as they're not frost sensitive. If they're tender plants, the frost will cut through the greenhouse and will kill the plants. But if they're not sensitive, you've got potted box trees, for example, we're talking about box, they'll be fine. They'll do a little bit of growing over the winter. But for tender plants, you'd have to heat the greenhouse, and that is often a very expensive business.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I'm afraid to say that is all we've got time for. A huge thank you to Ceri and Guy for your expert advice. And of course, you can keep your questions coming in on the Which Gardening Facebook page. We'll keep the conversation going there. And Guy, for people wanting to find out more about the RHS, how can they?
Well, they can visit our website, which is rhs.org.uk, where there's oodles of gardening advice and information about our flower shows and all the other many activities undertaken by the Royal Horticultural Society.
Fantastic stuff. And Ceri, for people wanting to find out more about the Which Gardening Facebook page and the October magazine, which you plugged earlier, how can they?
Just go along to Which Gardening. It's a Facebook group, so just ask to join us and we'll put you through straight away. And it's a lovely group. Everybody's there showing pictures, sharing advice, asking questions, and we're giving you behind the scenes views of what we're up to at Which Gardening, whether it's showing you what trials we're doing and the best varieties that are coming out, or we're visiting people like our contributor Bob Brown, who's at Cotswold Garden Flowers, and he's giving us videos of what he's up to in the garden. So there's just so much more that we can give you than a magazine.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us, and thank you for watching.